follow me and you'll hit the spot. I could sell everything you've got, make you into what you are not, package and mold you, lick you and fold you. Get your head around this, I am offering bliss. Blow me a kiss, do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Do you want to feel the heat? People screaming at your feet. Oh, hold yourself steady. Ah, yeah, you're already mine. It's time. It's time here.
Do you know who I am? Do you know who she is? No, it's not Lottie Lenya or Marianne Faithfull. I'll tell you who she is in just a minute. But first of all, I should say that this is LNL. And welcome, Gladdies and Potties, to what I hope will be a particularly fascinating program. You've just heard a grab from a film called Goddess, in which my favourite Australian comic, Magda Szubanski, plays a lethal advertising executive called Cassandra Wolfe. And I'm going, Magda, I had no idea that you could sing.
No,
I know you can do. I know you can do everything bloody well else, but sing.
I wouldn't say that, but no. I think sometimes having a bit of an ear for accents and musical ability are they go a bit hand in hand. But I was relieved that I didn't disgrace myself, and it's fun. It's really fun to sing, but it's in a studio in a controlled environment. It's always a nice way to do it.
I wonder whether you remember a moment in your long career when we were both in a restaurant at the Siebel, which was the sort of the showbiz hangout in Sydney.
I do.
And I professed undying love to you. Do you remember that?
I reckon I might have professed it back. Yeah, I do, because it was such a haunt, the Siebel. That was where all the show folk used to go. And I can't remember who you were having lunch with. You were engaged in a lengthy, chit-chatty, boozy lunch with someone. And I remember I came over and joined you for a bit, but for the life of me, I can't remember who the other person was, which is
what
terrible.
I can remember is we're talking 30 years ago.
Yeah, it would be a long time ago, yeah.
Okay, let me now remind the listener, the Gladdies and the Potties, just what you've been up to since then. You've got a long list of Logies and ASTRA awards and People Choice Awards as long as your arm, not only for comedy writing and performance, but as one of the best loved figures in this wide brown land. So, Magda, it is just heaven to have you on the Little Wireless program. But if you don't mind, I want to start off with being a bit sombre before we get on to the funny stuff. Many, many years ago, a great Polish filmmaker, Andrzej Wajda, in fact it was 1956, made a film called Kanał. It was about how the Polish underground used the sewers under the city to move around and to try and survive. You've been down those sewers. Why?
Because my father had been down one of those sewers. In fact, my father told me to watch Wajda's film Kanał. My father was in Poland during the war, my whole family obviously, the name Szubanski being Polish. And he fought in the resistance, as did many other Poles, and 200,000 people were killed and the city was flattened, and the only way for the resistance members to escape was through those canals, and I vividly remember my father describing to me what it was like in those canals. And the Wajda film that depicts it as hell on earth is not a metaphor. That if hell exists, one of the places exists is in those canals. And I remember my father saying how they were escaping, the Germans were above them, and I was in all ignorance. I was saying, well, couldn't you have had a flashlight or a light or something? He said, don't be ridiculous. The Germans would open a manhole and drop a carbide bomb and you'd be gone. And they couldn't talk. It was in utter silence. And he said, you would be walking for, it was like 8 or 10 hours or something to get out, while the Germans are destroying your city and your country above you, walking out through shit up to your chin for about 8 or 10 hours. And he said, and every now and then, it was the only time he'd really been scared, and my father did some pretty extraordinary things during the war, but this was the only time he was really scared. And he said you would be walking along and suddenly your foot would go just down through something. And I said, what was that? And he said, the body of someone who hadn't made it. And he lost the grip. They would walk with holding onto the belt of the person in front of them, and he lost the grip of the man in front of him. And And in that pitch black, he said he just really went into a total funk. And so when I did Who Do You Think You Are, they took me back to that very sewer that my father had been in, which was sort of quite a chilling moment. Even now, if you have even a hint of claustrophobia, it's pretty full on. But to think of that, and those kids that used to guide them through, they were scouts, girls and Boy Scouts, and they would guide them through. And one of them was telling me he would sit there for 5 hours in the pitch black, and it's unimaginable courage. So that's the story of the sewer.
I understand that when your father tried to tell people about his experiences after the war, people found them hard to believe.
Yeah, I think that's kind of true of a lot of Polish experience. If you've ever read any Tadeusz Konwicki, he has a fantastic description of that kind of... I think it's probably what the experience that a lot of people who've experienced deep ongoing trauma and horror feel, that when they try and tell people about it, it's so alien to our experience. And certainly when Dad, I think even in Britain after the war, the Brits were going through their own thing, but I think what the Poles had gone through was just such a...
it kept getting worse because your father fights in the Warsaw Uprising against the Nazis while the Soviets stand by and watch 200,000 men, women and children die.
Yeah, well, they kind of orchestrated it, really, And the Polish fight for freedom, it's almost like a joke when you speak to any Polish person. I went to Poland last year and met with Raymond, my father's cousin, who's more like an uncle to me, And I was with my friend Stella and we were asking him, about Poland. He said, well, in 1795, with the third partition of Poland, it all, that sort of destruction of Poland and the way that it vanished from the map, and their struggle for democracy wedged between two imperialist powers is something that's very interesting for all of us. But the other reason that people found my father's story improbable is because he was an assassin in an execution squad, a top-secret counterintelligence squad. And if you had met him, you would never have thought that. He was 5'4", he was cheery, he played tennis and mowed the lawn, and he was not like a 007 James Bond.
But he was under
character.
instructions from the Polish government in exile, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. They had
do this hit or that one.
Yeah, it was mandated by the government, and the Poles took a very hard line on collaboration because, of course, there were a lot of ethnic Germans who were in Poland who were called Volksdeutsch, and they were operating sort of as a fifth column, informing to the Nazis where the names of Polish resistance fighters, but also they were telling the Gestapo where Jews were hiding, and my family were hiding Jews. Which was, of course, a death penalty number, wasn't it? Yeah, Poland, not many people know this, but Poland was actually the only country where the penalty for hiding a Jew was a death sentence. So the level of risk, I look at, honestly, I look at pictures of my grandmother, and whenever I meet any people who knew that, they go, oh, you look so like your babcha, you're so like your babcha, She was a fat, middle-aged, upper-middle-class woman who was, slept every night with a gun in her pocket and the Polish flag folded up underneath her head, and they held resistance meetings at their house and they hid Jewish people, and my grandfather and my uncle were smuggling guns into the ghetto, and I just think, the level of courage is kind of mind-boggling, really.
And it's on both sides of the family, in a sense, because your mother's side of the story is...
We're trounced, because, Polish and Irish, the two... Can I say shat upon?
Absolutely.
I think there are a lot
and used to be, of course, the victim of the worst racist jokes. Yeah,
the dumb Pollock jokes and the Irish jokes, all of that, yeah. But my Polish family, were quite well off. So, comparatively with him, before the war, they had a really great life. They were off to the ballet every month and the circus and skiing in Zakopane, and, they had a really good life. But my Irish grandfather, just came from generations of absolute unrelenting poverty. And it was very interesting when I did the Who Do You Think You Are program to go and learn much more and to realise just how Irish I am. And now when I reread the Dubliners, I go, oh my God, that's so my family. A lot of it makes sense.
But your ethnicities are remarkably complex. There's very few people I know who are as multifaceted, as Rubik cubed as you are.
We've got a bit going on because my dad was Polish and it's just pretty much Polish all the way along there. But on Mum's side, she's the mongrel. Her father was Irish. She's Scottish. My mum's Scottish. Her father was Irish. Her great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, was an Italian sculptor who, believe it or not, and this didn't make it to air, but there'd always been this family legend about, remember the grave robbers, Burke and Hare?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
who were notorious serial killers. They killed like 16 or 17 people in order to make a tidy profit, and sold the cadavers to Edinburgh University. Well, my great-great-grandfather, Luigi Izepponi, who was from Lake Como, was a sculptor in Edinburgh of some renown, and at a very youthful age of about 18 or 19, he did the death mask for William Burke.
Wow.
I know. So when I went to the Department of Anatomy, which spookily enough my father had studied at after the war because he studied medicine, they took me there and there's this head of William Burke, a death mask that my great-great-grandfather had worked on. So we're kind of like just death until we get to Australia, my family. It's pretty darn grim. So
And then you jump out of the great cake of humour and keep us all laughing. I want to get onto that later because it's very often, in my experience, comics, good comics, great comics, do have a lot to cope with in their personal, psychological or family lives. It's often a form of exorcism.
Oh, yeah, exorcism and denial and joy and life affirming. It's, it's interesting that we're talking about this. It's something that I'm sort of interrogating in some work I'm doing at the moment, like what is comedy for and what is it about and where does it come from? And certainly think for me, when you look at Sharon Strzelecki, I think part of what people love about her is there's also a bit of a melancholy in her. You know, there's a vulnerability about her.
But that's something that's true of all your characters. There's always a poignancy about them, and you are life affirming as a comic. You know, there's a lot of warmth in your interpretations of people, even no matter how bizarre, how odd, how nutty they are. You can feel your fondness for them.
Oh, good. Because I actually, I do love people. I'm a people person, although I can be quite hermity at times. But one of the things I do love about performing is that you know the expression walk a mile in my shoes. Well, you kind of do that. You're literally wearing the character's shoes. For some time, a period of time, you're experiencing what it's like to be. Clothes maketh the man, and when you wear that costume, you go, oh my God, that's what it would be like to be that person, and it tends to make you a little less judgmental, I think. So,
You came out a little while ago. Was that difficult or easy?
It's something I had thought about for a very long time and hesitated over for a lot of reasons, not least of all because I'm actually quite shy, as a lot of performers also are. But I think as I've gotten older, I've felt more comfortable moving out from behind the characters and being my real self, and felt more of a desire to do that. But, after years of therapy, I think I felt in a really good place to do it. But even so, I did have a what the F have I done moment afterwards, which was just pretty much... It's like buyer's remorse, when you buy a house or make some major commitment and you go, oh my God, what have I done? So I took myself off to Spain because my friend Diego had somewhat erroneously led me to believe that Spain was like a gay paradise and the streets would be paved with lesbians.
I don't remember that being the case.
No, curse him. But it was fascinating actually to be there. I wanted to sort of be in a place, I just needed to be out of Australia for a little bit, but be in a place where they had gay marriage and total equal rights. And that was a really interesting experience because a lot of the people that I met there, I interviewed some politicians and academics and actors, and there was no sense of what gay people bring to the economy or anything like that. It was purely just, all of them just spoke on a rights basis, and it very much came from their oppression under Franco.
Isn't it interesting that very often hardline Catholic countries that have had dictators like Salazar in Portugal or Franco in Spain are the first to jump completely in the opposite direction?
Yeah, the Catholic Church is so complicated. It's always been two sort of different churches, really. There's the magisterium, or the, career priests, as I like to call them, and then there's the real church, and that real church is so concerned with social justice, and it's a natural extension of that. I mean, the Catholic Church, I am so absolutely culturally Catholic all the elements. The one thing that has glued all of those mongrel elements of my family together has been Catholicism. You know, they've all been Catholic. And it drives me a little bit crazy that something that is very profoundly my heritage I'm excluded from because of a decision that's been made by the magisterium. But, you know, I think the bulk of people who are in the church actually, you know, are in one way or another going against the edicts there, you know, aren't they?
But you don't have to be in the church. As my producers know, I've got a very strong view that the best guests tend to be lapsed Catholics. They bring with them, you know, the sense of social justice, the wonderful sort of Catholic, all the world overview, and a liberation from dogma. The number of great people who are lapsed Catholics, LCs as opposed to RCs, is astonishing.
Well, I found myself strangely, it's something I'd always written off for a while, and then I for some reason, I don't know whether it's just something I'm having to re-examine, because before I came out, one of the things I did do was start reading the Bible and some interpretations of the Bible, because I thought that would be where most of the criticism came from. Luckily, you know, there wasn't a lot of criticism anyway, but it was like I had to pull the Bible out of my own head anyway, because it had gotten in there and really messed with me, that whole Catholic upbringing. But I think maybe, you know, I just, for whatever reason, I have quite a religious, spiritual temperament.
Haven't you moved towards Buddhism?
I'm a little bit up for wherever will have me, to an extent, in a sense of where you
another
belong.
Aspect of the mongrel, a word you use, which I love, incidentally.
Yeah, love a mongrel. But going from my father's experience, and it has left me always with a sense, which is very typically second generation. And the Poles are in a funny situation because, you know, if you say you're a second generation Holocaust survivor, if you're Jewish, people immediately know what that means. But my closest friends, Polish friends, both of them, their grandparents were in concentration camps, and my family were hiding Jewish people. My father lost his best friend. You know, they were deeply, deeply affected by what was happening to Jewish people as well as to themselves. But how you reconcile all of that with pacifism, and how the Buddhists deal with that same kind of invasion in Tibet, and then turn that around to think of compassion for their oppressor, is something that really, really interests me. It's
but as you know, if you go back far enough, there are very close connections between Buddhism and Christianity.
Yeah, well, you know, some people say that in those missing years Christ went off to India and learned a bit of Buddhism there, but, you know...
And is buried there.
Yeah.
You can visit his tomb.
Have you been?
Not that a good Catholic girl, no. A good Catholic girl couldn't possibly do that. It's blasphemy. Look, let's circle around to mongrels, known in the beef business as hybrid vigour. I remember once I had to do I was running the National Australian Day Council on Australia Day, and I did an Australian Day address, and I got myself into terrible trouble by praising the notion of a mongrel nation. I see it as our great strength, whereas others, of course, see it as dangerous. You know, the current attacks on multiculturalism are escalating and getting nastier. But there's something wonderful about a society which has got as many ingredients as ours. It's like a mosaic with lots of brilliant tiles that make a picture.
I mean, you look at Obama. He's a great example of someone who's able to build bridges between people because he's not just any one thing. And I think, again, the Polish experience really informs my attitude towards multiculturalism, because that's something where you've sort of seen over the course of, you know, probably more like 600 years or so, the destruction of tolerance, you know, because Poland, you know, in the 14th, 15th century invited the Jews in and was a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. Up until 1795, before the country was taken over by the Austrians, the Prussians and the Russians, Poland had no laws against homosexuality. It was the only country in Europe that had no laws against homosexuality. And it was only when it was overtaken by Prussia, Russia and Austria that homosexuality was outlawed. And then again, when they gained their independence in the 1930s, they decriminalised it. So for me, you know, that's a very alive issue, how cultures managed to work together. Because you look at what happened to Poland in the end, and now it's a terribly homophobic, you know, by and large, country. It's very mono-religious. And, there are elements of anti-Semitism that are really disturbing. And
all of that is true. All of that is true. And on my many visits to Poland, a country for which I have a profound love, you're conflicted by this bombardment of contradictions.
Yeah.
But you're also confronted by what I still regard as the most moving post-war gesture anywhere, and that is the rebuilding of the old city when the people were living in rubble, eating rats, and they clean up the rubble and the bricks and they start to rebuild the old town.
Yeah.
What an achievement that was. What a piece of collective spirituality.
Beautiful. And it also says something about history too, that, the destruction of that town becomes kind of like a blip. In a few hundred years, that old part of the town will be very old again, and it will be seen over the course of its, however many hundreds of years of that one moment of destruction. I was recently asked to be, partly, because I am such a mongrel, the MC at a seminar, a conference about multiculturalism. And one of the things that really interested me to learn was that 47% of Australians are either foreign-born or have one parent who's foreign-born. The guy who was talking about it was saying we shouldn't draw lessons from Europe because they don't actually practice multiculturalism. They practice monoculturalism. And what gave me great hope was that here, by and large, it does work, and it's not by accident. It's because of social engineering. They sort of had policies in place to, rather than just letting it happen, to try and ensure that it would work. So it's a complex thing, but there's more than just the bells and whistles of food and music. There's it's like travelling, isn't it? Except that those different viewpoints are coming here instead of us having to go elsewhere to find them.
You're often called on to MC events. I understand that you're doing this with the Dalai Lama during his Melbourne visit.
I am, yes. I'm very honoured. That's a very great honour. He's an amazing human being. I think he's such an important person to have in the world. I mean, you look at what the Catholic Church is doing at the moment and you think, dudes, your only job is compassion.
We should have snuck him into the Sistine.
Yeah, I mean,
he'd make a bloody good pope, actually.
Wouldn't he? I think a lot of people who, that fantastic phrase from Karen Armstrong where she says there's a God-shaped hole in the world, and he kind of fills it, I think, for a lot of people, actually.
Well, even for a dyed-in-the-wool, lifelong atheist like me, he has my respect. This is LNL on RN, and I'm talking to many people in the guise of Magda Szubanski. Say your name, your whole Polish name for me, because it gives me goosebumps.
In Polish, my name would be Magdalena Maria Teresa Szubańska.
Isn't that sexy? I reckon that's terrific.
It's better than Magda Szubanski.
Yeah. Well, coming back to sexuality, because that's multicultural as well, isn't it? I was born into a world where you divided the sexes into A and B, like there was only Catholics and Proddies. It was a very simple thing growing up in East Kew. But sexuality, which I think, if there is a God, it's his greatest joke, sexuality is so complex, so multifaceted. Yeah,
and I think that was one of the big things for me in terms of coming out and it has sort of been a bit lost in the wash, although I was careful to say, I'm gay, a little bit not gay, because for me it was, what word am I going to use to describe myself? I don't want to misrepresent, but that is the truth of my experience, and I'm in terms of relationships with men, I'm a never say never. I'm not 100%er. And so I had to also partly wait for a time when the world had got a grip of the idea of sexual fluidity and was more comfortable with that, so that I could be coming out and absolutely honestly, without any sort of defensiveness or feeling like I was pandering to one side or the other, but just really representing for the vast, the lot of us who are somewhere in the middle,
Did you get a backlash? Did you get hate mail and nasties? Or
no,
basically people were accepting?
No, it was absolutely beautiful. A couple of crazies on Twitter who I find sort of hilarious. No, it was over.
You find them hilarious?
I do. I do.
Because
they're just so out there. And I sometimes go and sort of look into their their little Twitter file thing and look at the tweets they've done to other people, and it's just a mad barrage of abuse. And I just sort of I go, oh, okay, well, I won't be taking that very personally then. You're just crazy. But no, it was overwhelmingly positive, actually. It was really very, very moving. And I wasn't sure how it was going to go, because it's a sort of thing that people can be irrational about, It can really push people's buttons. So it was extraordinary.
Yeah. I think people would probably like me to ask you a bit about being funny. When did you realise you were? Because you are very.
Thank you.
You're too funny. You're dangerously funny.
Oh, I do love having fun and being funny. I'm glad you think I'm funny. I'm glad people think I'm funny because that means I get to do it. But I remember really vividly, my mother is hilarious and very dry, and she's nearly 89, but she's still to this, she doesn't have like old lady humour. It's like naughty, cheeky, a bit meaner than me, but very funny. And I remember when I must have been about 6, because I came home from school, and I can't remember exactly what it was I said, but I made my mother laugh, and that was just like, yes, I've arrived.
You're like St. Joan hearing her voices. Something marvellous had happened.
Yeah. And then I never thought I would be a comedian ever. I wanted to be a doctor. I was obsessed with medicine from the age of 3. By the time I was 9, I knew the name of every body in the bone in the human body. I knew how to dissect a person from reading my father's old anatomy books. For a long time, it felt like kind of I did comedy because I wasn't really good at other things, or I was okay at other things, but I can lose my confidence terribly, and comedy seemed like a way of just subverting it so that I wouldn't get too perfectionist or something. But then gradually, as time went by, I just started to really love it. But I certainly never thought.
If you cultivate a sense of your own ridiculousness, if you keep reminding yourself of your frailties, it's a good way of coping with them.
Oh, it's the most gorgeous feeling, and when you share that with other people, and absolutely, you're right. The sense of your own ridiculousness, I think, really is up there as one of the best feelings ever.
Coming back to the appalling problems with that your parents endured, reminds me of my absolute central belief about humour, laughter, jokes, whatever, and that is that we are alone in the universe, as far as we know, of being with the knowledge of our mortality. We know about death, and what evolution has given us to help us cope with this dread awareness is laughter. To me, laughter is the other side of that same coin.
It is so funny you're saying this, because it so is exactly something I'm writing about at the moment, and you will see eventually. But
this is the autobiography.
Yes, amongst other things, yeah. But I'm no stranger to the dark moods. Clearly you can tell I'm a serious little insect, but it's so physical and it's so effervescent. That feeling of joy and naughtiness and the ridiculousness of things, and to me it feels like the life force asserting itself. And when I look at my father, who saw some, I'm not going to tell you some of the things he saw, but I mean unimaginable horror, just inconceivable, but still, had a sense of optimism and humour. And the same with my Irish grandfather, who similarly, and both funny men. Polish humour is really, their humour is really complex because it grew under the oppression of, the Tsarist regime or, the Nazis and then the communists. They've had to go underground with it, to the point that to a foreigner you can barely detect it, but they know exactly, and it's nearly always directed at the Russians, the Polish humour.
That was one of the great gifts of Poland, was the nudge, nudge, wink, wink response to tyranny.
Well, my cousin is an actress, a famous actress in Poland. Have I told you that?
No.
Whose name is Magda, believe it or not. And she's older than me, but she was part of there's a Polish cabaret called Dudek, and it was all in that, woven in through it. But even the way they do Shakespeare, it was so political for them. And I remember going to see Shakespeare in Warsaw in Polish, and I don't speak a word of Polish, but they'd be getting things and laughing at things, and, the senses would be there, but they couldn't, it was so elusive, they couldn't quite ever get it, and they couldn't really nail them on it, but the Poles would be pissing themselves, and,
You are intensely political. but you don't do a lot of overtly political humour.
I wonder about that, if that might be something of my father's experience that's just made me want to steer away from it or something. I don't know.
Well, you've already pointed out that you are sensitive, you are shy, and perhaps you finally don't want that sort of confrontation.
Oh, yeah, I hate confrontation. I hate conflict.
Yeah.
I really don't like it.
So do I. I never have rows on the program. I'm always terribly nice to people I detest.
I think there might be an element of being in the closet about that before too, of just feeling just somehow kind of weakened or vulnerable or something. And I think since I've come out, I feel so much stronger. And that very overused phrase, empowered.
Yeah.
It's kind of something that's very easy to go, cliche about, until you can feel it within you. And it's an extraordinary feeling. And I had no idea it was going to feel like this. And for a while, I was frightened that for me it wouldn't. But I think that there was something that it just was like it was like having a kryptonite inside me or something, I think. And I think that did make me sort of stay away from any kind of public arena, really, in a sense. And now I kind of feel like I have nothing to hide, I think. So maybe that'll change. It's interesting you say that, because it's something I've kind of been thinking about.
There was a sense of humour, I think, in the day you chose to come out, Valentine's Day. That
was Karen Phelps's suggestion, actually, which is a beauty, yeah.
It was the special day for my old friend Joan Lindsay. It was the day in which he met Daryl, married Daryl. It's the day, of course, for Picnic at Hanging Rock. It's a day with a lot of clout.
I had been thinking for a while about it, and I had a bunch of friends, Alex Greenwich, who's the head of Marriage Equality, and Karen Phelps and Jackie Stricker, and we were kind of thinking about what's a good way to do it, and Karen said, why don't you come out on Valentine's Day? And it's something I do really like about the gay community, is that it's a very humorous kind of, rainbow-coloured revolution. I like the fact that we subvert in that way. I think that's a really great tradition and a great way of, it's like a form of non-violent protest, isn't it, really?
It is, and here's another group that need humour to survive and to cope.
Absolutely, yeah. There've been not a lot of credible sort of gay romances really on primetime Australian television.
Well, there was one, and it was a film called Gallipoli, and I remember making this point to David Williamson that it was the first male love story, and both David and Peter admitted to me that the film was in fact a projection of their own intense relationship in collaborating.
But there you go. It's all subtext, though.
It's all subtext. It's not up front. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, in Britain and America, I'm using other English-speaking countries here, but the stuff that's happening like on Glee and it's amazing.
You've got enough power and enough influence, enough leverage in this country to drive it in that direction.
Well, maybe I am.
Is that what you're doing and you're not telling us?
I can't tell you.
Dear,
you will be.
Dear.
This is music to a journo's ears. I know. You will be the first to know, Phillip. You will be the first to know.
Well, that's not true. That's not true.
You might be.
You tantalising creature. No wonder I professed undying love in that restaurant 30 years ago.
Because I'm a tease.
You're self-taught, aren't you? You didn't go to sort of school and learn to be funny. You sort of developed your personas. You developed your approach to comedy yourself.
Yeah, I steered clear of any of the institutions because the only instinct I had was to know that mine was a slightly precarious and unusual kind of talent, I think, and a self-preservation instinct, led me to understand that had I gone to NIDA and been pulled apart and picked to pieces, I would never have been able to put myself back together again. I did a very brief, intermittent, on and off year at Melbourne Uni, but really no training.
What were you studying? Medicine?
I ended up doing philosophy and art history, but I was also working in a women's refuge, and it was entirely possible I could have gone down that path into sort of social welfare, but I ended up auditioning for a law review and got in, and it just kind of went from there, really.
The Law Review, heavens above.
The Law Review.
I remember Barry Humphries saying if you wanted to see the next generation of great humorists in Australia, you went to the Law Review at Melbourne Uni.
Yeah, it's been a breeding ground for so many, all the working dog guys and just so many people. It's some people sometimes like to suggest it's a mafia, and it's if only it was that easy.
I remember coming back to this thing about doing it yourself. When I used to be friends with Hogan and Cornell, I saw them on a plane going to Los Angeles. And I said, "What are you doing?" "We're going to learn humour from the Bob Hope people." And I said, "You are effing kidding. What you've got spontaneously, what you've just extemporised is magic." And I think it was when he came off the bridge. But to think that he was going to go and often get processed. There are there not, quite amazingly interesting, idiosyncratic Australian approaches to humour?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a...
You say that with doubt.
No. I absolutely think there is. I mean, there's a love of the underdog, I think, that we have that maybe the Americans don't get. They've caught up in the sarcasm stakes, though. I mean, and that's a lot to do with the Jewish humour. Like, their sense of irony and sarcasm is, it's just so fantastic.
Sometimes I find it too much to handle. I find Larry David stuff so excruciating. I go and put my head under a cushion.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Arrested Development. I love
Wonderful. Hallowed be its
show.
name. I thought the Gary Shandling show was one of the great triumphs of American comedy.
I love Friends. I thought that was a great show. But here it's really difficult because we're not good with lowbrow comedy in this country. We have no respect for it. In that sort of lowbrow kind of, how the Americans will churn out those films like A Dumb and Dumber and things like that.
Ah, right.
There's nothing here. We're all kind of geared towards...
we did Barry McKenzie in 1970 and Elvin and that stuff.
I know, but not much since. And it's hard. Critics don't really have the same tolerance for Australian lowbrow humour as they do for American.
Do you remember when The Castle was attacked by quite a lot of critics who should have known better? There's often the argument that it's condescending or patronising when it's usually celebratory.
Yeah, well, so is Kath and Kim.
Of course it is.
But I mean, Kath and Kim was neither celebratory nor condemnatory. It was a product of the suburbs, which is Australia is an absolutely suburban nation. It doesn't matter if you're living in the inner suburbs. You're either fleeing from or to the suburbs. You're defined by the suburbs. It doesn't matter if you live within 7 k's of the CBD. I mean, I grew up in Croydon, one of the outer suburbs of Melbourne. It's not like that's not in me.
Yeah.
And I think we all have a very problematic and complex relationship to the suburbs. And the interesting thing would be the number of people who they'd come up to me and go, "Oh, we love it. It's exactly like us." And they had no shame or problem with it. It was kind of a weird...
There's a thrill of recognition. My life is being represented on this screen.
Finally. Yeah. And you have to know it to represent it. So it's clearly within us.
Kim's second best friend, Sharon, was still desperate and dietless and had been on every celebrity diet known to man.
Oh, here she is, the biggest loser.
Oh, Sharon.
Hi, Mrs. D. Hi, Kim.
What's wrong, love?
Gotta go to the toilet. What's my new diet? The Orlando Bloom prune diet. Oh, wow, that diet really works. Respect, Orlando.
Thanks, Mrs. D.
Still fat. Oh, Kim.
I want to add to all the pile of prize breaking your mantelpiece under their bulk and weight by giving you a koala stamp, which is the highest award this program can endow.
That's going to take the pride of place, let me tell you. That I set great store by that, thank you.
And 30 years later, I re-profess my love to you, Magda. You're just terrific.
Oh, right back at you. Thank you.
The latest film, Goddess, should be out on DVD soon.
Yep.
And I think that... we'll all rush out and buy at least 2. We're going to go out with some more of Magda doing a Lottie Lenya come Marianne Faithfull singing Do You Know Who I Am from her latest film, Goddess. Thank you so much, Magda.
Thank you.
Great.
It's been really lovely to chat to you. Thank you.
Do you want to feel the heat of people screaming at your feet? Oh, hold yourself steady. Yeah, you're already mine. If dotted line. You're not that special, baby.
RN, your world unfolding.